1. So to start, I'm super shy. But after I graduated from community college, I decided I wanted to get my art degree. So I made the completely terrifying decision to move hours away from home, to life in a city. Even though I am from a small country town and have never stayed in a city before. Well, everything was pretty normal at first. There was the creepy things that happen in cities, like creepy old men and drug addicts. And there was always sirens going off. That's pretty normal for the area, though. Well, things started getting slowly creepy, which again is normal for the area. If you don't know, Louisville, Kentucky is super haunted. Not only is Waverly Hotel there, but in the 1920s a giant flood happened and killed so many people. And then there is the Pink Palace. It's also super haunted. The dorms I lived in had not been open for a long time. They used to be one of those places nuns stayed, then a nursing home or something, and then a school dorm area. Well, it started in the studio rooms. They were attached to the same building that I lived in for the first 2 years I was there. You felt really creepy in there, and it always felt like something bad was watching you. The feeling got worse when you were alone. It soon went from creepy feelings to strange and scary things happening. I'm not sure how to tell this story, so I'll just make a list. Number 1. A friend of mine could not find his laptop and headphones one morning. He opened the door to his room, which was locked tight all night, and found the laptop in front of his door and his headphones strung up on people's doorknobs. Number 2. Things were moving in people's rooms. My best friend's stereo speaker kept moving a little wherever she set it. Number 3. The furniture in the other dorm area moved a few feet when no one lived in that area, and even the cameras didn't show anyone in there or anything moving. Number 4. I was sleeping in my dorm room, before I promptly switched rooms, and woke up to a loud screaming. I sat up in my bed and saw a floating head with hair flying everywhere and her mouth open and screaming loud. She disappeared and the screaming slowly faded away. I did not sleep that night. Number 5. A door on the first floor that no one lived in started rattling like someone was trying to open it, but couldn't. Number 6. Fast forward 2 years. Not much happened the second year, or maybe it did. I was super depressed and barely left my dorm room. And I was telling my dorm mates a scary story about a ghost that knocks 3 times, and lo and behold, something knocked on the door 3 times, and no one was there, or anywhere near the hallway. Number 7. That same year, a cup smashed in the kitchen when no one was in there. Number 8. When sleeping in my room one night, I woke up to a zapping feeling in my side. My phone was unplugged, and the wire bent and near my hip. 9. A lady's scream was heard and her yelling for help. She was seen on the security camera running away when 2 seconds later, the security guard came from the direction she ran and said he didn't see or hear anyone. Number 10. TVs and printers would randomly mess up for no reason. Number 11. Freshmen that year played with a Ouija board and said they almost got possessed. Was not there for that one, so I don't have much details. Number 12. I always heard scratching and tapping at my window, but nothing was ever there. I dreamed about a skeletal monster standing at my bed and pointing at my window in the moonlight. A lot more probably happened I don't know about, but I hope at least a few people believe me. Also, if anyone has any idea how to get ghosts out of a dorm room, so I can tell my friends who still live there, that would be wonderful. They have tried holy water, salt, prayer, and much else. The holy water seemed to work for a little while, but it always wore off. 2. Just a brief backstory to what happened. On Christmas Day of 2009, my grandfather passed away in a care home. Due to a skeleton staff on shift that day and no admin staff, we weren't told until next day. The funeral and cremation was held in the middle of January 2010. My grandmother planned to scatter his ashes near a river where he liked to walk when he was younger. She had discussed this with him before his death. Sadly, when the time came, she couldn't bring herself to scatter his ashes, and so she delayed scattering them for about 3 months. I remember visiting her one afternoon in 2010, and she told me and my mother that she was going to go down to the river later that evening to scatter his ashes. She wanted to do it alone, and so we respected her wishes and left her to it. I went home and didn't really think much more about it. What happened next is what I cannot explain. I was sitting at my computer in the living room that evening. and I noticed that the clock on the windowsill next to me had stopped. It was about 11:30 p.m., but the clock is stopped at 10:20 p.m. I went into the kitchen to get a new battery for the clock, only to notice that the clock in the kitchen, also analog, had also stopped at exactly 10:20 p.m. These two clocks were different sizes, different brands, and even had different brands of batteries inside. They were not radio controlled or in any way controllable. Feeling a bit freaked out, I went upstairs to wake my girlfriend at the time, who'd gone to bed early, and told her about this weird thing that happened, and then noticed that the clock on the bedside table had also stopped at exactly 10:20 p.m. Analog, battery-powered, and different to the other two. So at this point I'm thinking 1 clock stopping is unfortunate, 2 is a coincidence, but 3 is beyond anything I can comprehend. So I went on a hunt around the house for any more clocks, and the only other one I could find was in our son's room. At the time our son was only 8 weeks old, and he was still sleeping in a cot in our bedroom. But his bedroom was where we prepared for when he was a bit older. The clock in his room was on a shelf, and was of the design of some kid's cartoon character. That had also stopped at 10:20 p.m, so by which time I'm more than freaked out. I replaced all the batteries and the clock started functioning normally again, and this never happened again. It was only a couple weeks later when I visited my grandmother again, and she explained that she went down and scattered my grandfather's ashes on the day that I last saw her. I didn't mention the incident about the clocks, but it did cross my mind, and I asked her when she went down to scatter his ashes near the river. She told me she left it quite late, but said it would have been shortly before 10:30 p.m. that night. A chill ran down my spine at that point because I wondered if this had any connection to what happened. I didn't tell her about the clocks, because I didn't want to frighten her. Apparently my grandfather played around with some black magic once, and it scared the hell out of her, so I knew she was afraid of things like this. I did tell my mother, and although she believed me, it didn't bother her that much, because she said she'd seen and heard my grandfather in her house, until his ashes were scattered. 3. I was possessed by spirits from my high school years. I want to give some context about why I think like that, especially the people around me. I'm from the Philippines, where the paranormal always reigns supreme over logical thinking. There are a lot of people here with very superstitious beliefs and believe that prayers and being blessed by a priest will make everything wrong in your life suddenly go away. So with that out of the way, I'll make a TLDR here to lessen the context. I can see spirits and sometimes hear them, to the point that I can't differentiate if they're actually real people. The only time I know they're actually spirits is if they actually look dead. Think horror movie ghosts. There was a period of time during my freshman year, I was 13, that I could see spirits roaming around our building. My school is notorious for having lots of spirits because it's really old, so take that in mind. During one of my classes, I saw these 3 girls that are inside the room. I can obviously tell they were spirits because they wore this old uniform that looked torn and dirty. But then they all turned towards me, and it's one of the most horrifying things that even now still haunts me. Their faces were all bloody and looked beat up, and they had this wide grin that looked like they were laughing permanently. I was so scared that I was shaking to the point that my seatmate next to me noticed. Eventually, they were all tense, and I was close to tears since the spirits were near my face, and I could see them even with my eyes closed, and I could hear them saying depressing things. I don't remember much about what they said anymore, but I know it was scary enough to drive me to tears. My teacher noticed that the people around me were moving away from me, and they told our teacher what was going on. I'm in a Catholic school, so the immediate thing they did was give me rosaries and crosses to hold until the end of class. When my mom fetched me, I told her I was freaking out because I saw these 3 spirits that scared me so much. So we went home, and I was still bothered from what I saw, that I could still see and hear the spirits. My family then contacted the spiritista, or a spirit person who can commune with spirits. While waiting, I remember that they wanted me to cite a prayer, but I somehow can't. And they made me hold on to a rosary, but I felt like I don't want to, and it felt itchy to hold. After that, the spirit person came. I could feel this off energy about me. After writing something on this paper and putting it in my hand, I passed out. What my family told me afterwards was that I was talking in this old Spanish-like accent, and I was thrashing about like I was in immense pain. They told me that the spirit person wasn't putting intense pressure to make me in pain, but rather it was what they wrote that was giving the spirits inside me pain. They told me then afterwards that the spirit person got to know who was inside me, and it was the 3 girls. The spirit person then asked what they wanted from me, why did they say such things to me, and why they wanted to be inside me, and even asked for their names. To cut this part short, the spirit person got them out of me, and said that I would be okay. When the spirit person got them out, I was already starting to wake up, even though I had zero idea what happened. Either way, after this incident, I was told by the spirit person to wear this amulet, and that the thing inside it was the paper he wrote that would protect me from any paranormal event. Currently, I don't really see spirits anymore, and I don't wear the amulet, but there are still times I feel off from certain places in my school, and I can still feel the occasional cold spots. 4. I am a 37-year-old female psychic and medium, and I have known about my abilities from a very early age. Over the past 30+ years, I have had some very interesting encounters. I figured I would share these stories with you through a collection of stories. I'll begin with a small story to give you an overall idea of what is to come. My father was always receptive of my abilities, which include but are not limited to seeing and speaking with the dead. But my mother was a heavy skeptic regarding anything paranormal happening around her. Some things she simply couldn't deny. For example, I was about 4 years old when my family moved into a house in San Jose, California, and during one of their many arguments, a loose brick broke free of the fireplace, completely falling through our floor. My mom jumped back in fear because she said it felt like an ice-cold breeze had wrapped itself around her body, and she swore she heard 2 young girls crying. After that, she refused to go near the fireplace until my dad covered it entirely with wood. My father and I were used to things like that happening, though. It was at this same house in San Jose where I met a very nice, albeit deceased, family inhabiting the property. The father was a kind person, and the mother seemed to enjoy cleaning. They had a few children who I would play with by letting them watch me interact with my toys. Sadly, I could see the injuries on them that presumably caused their deaths. Other than that, they looked just like ordinary people, only translucent, although I have seen plenty of other spirits that have taken many different forms for various reasons. The father once told me that the bodies of most of them were buried under the house, but he was in a box buried on the side of the house under a strange, lumpy mass of concrete. Since I was a curious kid, I tried to dig around in that area one time, and eventually did find the corner of a wooden box, but the rest was inaccessible due to the concrete. However, they weren't all friendly spirits. I remember shortly after the incident where the brick fell through the floor, an apparition of a woman dressed in black and white clothing began to frequently appear in our kitchen. She would be weeping, and then would walk across the room and disappear into the wall leading into the garage. This would happen so often that my father eventually hung a sheet over the entryway into the kitchen, so we wouldn't have to see it all the time. Then there was the backyard. I always got a really bad feeling off that place. I had a very nice swing set in Jungle Gym, and a large, oddly patterned concrete area where I could play on my roller skates. I just couldn't bring myself to play there unless I was forced to, and even then I had to have someone there with me. The house behind us had several spirits that would come to the back fence and try to talk to me. I never got a good feeling from them. Sometimes the winds would pick up and it would get freezing cold, and the only sounds we would hear were the tree branches creaking and scraping. Even the large dog next door would fall silent during these times. There's plenty more to tell, but I hope this served as a good introduction to this series. 5. Labor Day of 2015. My mother, my wife, and 3 children and I went to a very remote cabin that we rented out. It was an old fire watchman station or something of that sort, so it had the cabin and 3 other sheds and shops. I'll try to keep it short now, but this is a bizarre story. We unpacked, settled into the cabin, and then decided to walk a couple 100 yards down to the river, barefoot in sandals with shorts for all of us. We got down to the pebbled shore and were playing and throwing rocks, etc., when I realized there were about 1-foot snakes everywhere. My wife, Mom, and I yanked up the 3 kids and boogied off. After reaching a safe distance from them, I went back with a water bottle and caught one in it to see what it was. Turns out we were in a nest of diamondback rattlesnakes. If one of those things latched onto one of my kids, they surely would have died. We were about 3 hours away from any medical facility. We got back to the cabin and my mom and I went out for a walk alone while my wife calmed the kiddos and fed them lunch. Upon returning about 15 minutes later, all 3 of my kids and my wife were inside with the doors and windows all closed up, even though we had everything open to cool the place off. We went inside to hear all 4 of them start yelling about a bear who was about 150 yards from the cabin, huffing and puffing at the wife and kids on the front porch, eating. It was down by the river, another 30 yards or so down the hill, that he poked his head up and over from. A few hours go by, and in that time, an ATV passed by 3 times with 2 inbred-looking freaks in it, and each time they stopped in front of the gate onto the property and stared at us in our cabin. Keep in mind, we're 2 hours into the wilderness in Idaho, with no sign of a person the whole trip, except them. We decide it's bedtime for the kiddos, and it's pitch black out. Within 10 minutes, our son, 5 at the time, went from being perfectly fine and active and talkative to having a fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit, slightly foaming at the mouth, and being completely unresponsive. That was it. We were leaving immediately and going to seek medical attention. I opened the front door of the cabin to start loading the 2 cars by the light of one porch bulb and the headlights on the cars, which were both parked facing the gate. And that's when all 3 adults heard about 4 to 6 large and heavy animals running all around the cabin and property. There was one on the right side of the house, when exiting, that I could hear pacing back and forth and breathing heavy. I made everyone stay inside and close the door every time I went outside to transfer stuff to the cars, about 4 or 5 trips. I had a stick and a big pot that I was smacking as hard as I could each trip, and was yelling loudly at random. As soon as I'm all done loading, I take each kid out individually and load them up between the 2 cars and escort Mom out, then wife out. My wife and I were in the lead car, so we pulled up out of the gate, and for some stupid motherfucking reason or another, I felt that I needed to close the gate. So I got out of my vehicle and walked behind it and my mom's car by about 15 feet and closed the gate. Now this gate was literally a log that slid from one post to the other. It offered zero protection or barrier between me and the animals out there. Right as I went to turn around, I heard loud padded footsteps walking up to me, directly in front of me, no more than 10 feet. Then I see eyes shimmering from the moonlight as the deepest, scariest growl I've ever heard in my life. I swear I must have jumped from where I was to the driver's seat to my car some 30 feet behind me, and as I landed in my seat, I slammed it into drive and spun out, finally leaving. It gets weirder and scarier, though. About 15 minutes down the road, we were still panicking about our unresponsive son, and we both kept having this horrible evil doom feeling cast a shadow over us. I looked down and realized I still had that baby rattlesnake in the water bottle in my cup holder, so I grabbed it and threw it out the window immediately. Not even 2 minutes later, we hear our son softly crying. We realize he's responsive, and he stated something along the lines of, "Why are we leaving? What's going on?" He was crying because he was sad to leave. He couldn't remember the last hour or so whatsoever. Quick backstory for what's next. My mother was about 58 years old at the time. She's been a Jehovah's Witness my whole life, plus many more years beforehand. She is the last person in the world to believe in signs, evil spirits, omens, etc. The next day my mom broke down extremely bad, sobbing her eyes out, hardly able to talk. She confessed to my wife that the night before we left she had a nightmare in which we went on a camping trip. We came across snakes, a bear, and a pack of wolves. She said she knew a lot of bad things happened at that outpost, and it was full of evil. Most of all, she said, "One of your kids died." I swear on my life to this very day, if I ask her who died and how it happened, she immediately starts crying and refuses to tell me or anyone. She lives her life now with the guilt knowing that she willingly ignored her nightmare and put us in this situation, nearly taking one of her dear grandkids away from this world. She doesn't deserve to feel that. I know this all sounds crazy as fuck, but a week later on the local news were reports of a wolf pack in that area. Wolves and bears may not coexist in harmony, but as far as I know, they do share territories and respect each other. This outpost situation of sorts was about 1.5 hours into the wilderness from Lomond Banks, Idaho, if you want to verify the animals actually exist around there. Sadly, I grew up in the mountains for the most of my preteen and early years, as did my wife until she was 10 years old. I even have a half sleeve of wilderness and trees on my left arm. With that said, we don't care to go to the mountains anymore. Thanks for hearing everything out, and I'll leave this too. I don't care if you believe me. This was and is real to my family's story, and I swear, that night changes a lot of things for us going forward. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 124. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I apologize to those of you who were expecting a glitch video today. It's just one of those lean weeks. I currently only have 2 stories. Maybe 3. Maybe 3, but one of them was quite short. So I will try to get one together for next week. I've sent plenty of messages out. Hopefully by the time next week comes along, I'll have more in. So we'll see what happens. But that does mean double paranormal this week. So for those of you paranormal fans who keep saying you should do more paranormal, there you go. And the glitch and paranormal tend to perform about the same anyway, so it seems like a reasonable thing to put up today. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.